Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and on this series of programs, we continue to examine public policy. And today we will deal with river transportation safety. And we like to boast that we're the land of many rivers, but rivers are rivers of hope, but they can also be rivers of death. And river safety is pricey, but it is priceless, because when you examine the number of lives which have been lost over the years, you would ask yourself as Guyanese, why can't we save more lives? And this is what we're talking about today. We recall that only in September, 2 passengers died when the motorboat in which they were traveling crashed into a beacon in the Essequibo River. 2 others died in a collision in the Pomeroon River. These are 2 of the most heavily used rivers in Guyana. In June, at that time, a motorboat carrying 18 passengers, overloaded. And sometimes, these so-called water taxis are like minibuses. They just pack passengers in without regard for safety. It was certified to carry only 15 passengers, but it had 18, and it sank. So these accidents are preventable. In fact, for this year, in the 10 months of this year, we've had 10 accidents. In fact, 10 fatalities. So people are dying in Guyana at a rate of 1 per month on our rivers. The rivers are not by any means safe places. And more can be done to make our rivers safe for the people who have to use them. Rivers are a necessity in the hinterland. People need them to get to their farms. Children need them to go to school. As you know, when I became president from the very year 2015, I started to provide school boats because I knew the necessity of children getting to school safely. In the hinterland, people need the rivers to go shopping and to go to work. If they're working in a mine or a farm, they need rivers. Because in some areas there are no highways, there are no roads. For example, the Pomeroon, is basically the only highway. Everybody has to learn to swim or use a boat to move about. Children can't go to school in a minibus; they have to go to school in a school boat. Rivers are natural routeways for travel and transport for much of our hinterland, and the hinterland comprises more than 3/4 of the country. They are our arteries, but sometimes those arteries could be fatal. They could get clogged, and the rate of fatalities is frightening. And if you want to attract tourists to Guyana, they will look at these statistics. They will say, these rivers, if I want to go birding or fishing, along these rivers, I could die. And no tourist wants to come to a place which is unsafe. No Guyanese tourists, tourists from our own diaspora. I'm not talking necessarily about foreigners, but people in one part of the country want to go birding and fishing. We'll realize that the rivers are not necessarily safe. In fact, they can be frighteningly unsafe. So we look at why are the rivers so unsafe in Guyana? Because there are abundant laws and regulations, but without enforcing those regulations, accidents will continue to cause damage, they will cause death, they will cause loss, they will cause injury. And if you look at any of these rivers, particularly the major rivers, they are competing users. They're not these placid postcard scenes that we like to imagine. There are many people using rivers. Farmers use the rivers. Fishermen use the rivers. Loggers use the rivers, and sometimes they can be very frightening, because in rivers like the Berbice River, you have huge pontoons laden with logs, 2 stories high, bauxite pontoons, traveling from upriver Kwakwani to the coast. And you run into one of those at night, you die. So a lot of people are using the rivers, and of course you have school children, and sometimes the corials or paddle boats, the canoes, could be swamped by powerful motorboats with engines, 200, 500 horsepower engines, just going through the rivers at a rate. And sometimes motorboats come from foreign countries. One of the fatal accidents involved Venezuelan motorboats in the Essequibo River. And they may not speak English, they may not understand our rules of the road, our regulations. And we must think about mothers. Women with children have to travel on these rivers. Sometimes they're disabled. Sometimes you go to Parica, you see, wedding parties, you see people going to funerals, but they must use the boat. And a place like the Parica Stelling, they could be, scenes of confusion and chaos. But people have to use the rivers every day. And it is the responsibility of the central government and regional administration to ensure that the rivers are safe. Why do accidents take place on the rivers? To start with, you can have situations in which the very operators are untrained or they're uncaring. And this is a problem. This is a human failing. People don't just pick up a boat and go across the river. They have to be trained. Sometimes the boats are unsafe or unseaworthy, or maybe I should say unriverworthy. They're leaky or they're old and they need repairs. Sometimes they are unlicensed. They're unregistered. And every boat must be registered, like every vehicle on the road must be registered. Every airplane in the sky must be registered. Every riverboat carrying passengers must be registered, and sometimes they're not. We have situations in which some of the boats are under-equipped. They don't have sufficient safety equipment, and the passengers don't have individual flotation kits. They may be unstable because they're overloaded, and sometimes when they run into turbulent waters, they capsize. And sometimes also, as has happened, because of the unregulated use of the rivers, fishermen may use seines, and when the seines get caught in the propellers, the boats could capsize. And when the boats capsize, people could drown. At night, boats which are unlit could collide with obstacles, or persons using the rivers legitimately could collide with boats which are unlit. And sometimes they operate outside of the speed limits. They're going faster than they are required to go. And sometimes they're operating outside of the time limits, because in most cases in the hinterland, use of the river is confined to daylight hours, sunrise to sunset. Roughly between 6 hours in the morning to 18 hours in the evening. And very often accidents occur when people breach those regulations and operate their boats in the dark, sometimes using their cell phones to navigate. And this is a matter that calls for regulation, and also the speed limits to have to be regulated. Sometimes also there are uncooperative passengers who refuse to wear the individual flotation kits, the life jackets. All these factors make river travel unsafe and risky in Guyana. So these are some of the reasons why we have so many accidents and so many fatal accidents. Particularly two large rivers, the Corentyne River and the Essequibo River, have been zones of chaos, and lots of fatalities have occurred in these rivers. Some historical, but we should look at them too, because they can happen again. And we must realize that many of these rivers, unlike the highways, are on signs. Signs are not only for highways and roadways. You need signs to indicate where there are dangers. Sometimes uh, boats which are wrecked are just left there. And if the wreckage is not signed, unfamiliar operators could crash into them. So there needs to be signage so that operators, sometimes people carrying tourists in the hinterland, would know where the wrecks are. And there must be warning signs. Because sometimes you get to the estuaries of the river, and sometimes even the estuary of the Escriba River, our largest river, could be very turbulent, and boats could capsize if the operators are not careful. There could be collisions with other motorboats on the river if people are unaware of the rules of the road, and floating objects. In some riverine areas, where they produce a lot of coconuts, people just throw the coconuts, into the river. Sometimes people attend an excursion and they throw the bottles, the beverage bottles, into the river. Sometimes there's unregulated, and I would say unlawful disposal of waste in the rivers. And these floating objects could sometimes cause collisions and capsizing. And when the boat capsizes, either due to turbulence, particularly the estuaries of the river, and the Escriba River could be very turbulent between Perica and the West Bank, Perica on the East Bank and the West Bank. And as a result of that, and incompetence of the operators, you can get capsizing. Sometimes, as I said before, entanglement of propellers in seines, illegal dumping of refuse, and all these things can cause drowning, collision, capsizing. And safety on the rivers could also be compromised by unlawful activities such as smuggling. And my friends, we know that in some areas, backtracking is almost inevitable over the last 20 or 30 years. And backtrackers are not inclined to delay their operations. They go at terrible speeds and sometimes endanger the very lives of the people that they're trafficking. Illegal migration. And as we know, within the last 2 years, boatloads of Venezuelan migrants, particularly of the Warao ethnicity, have been just arriving in the Pomeroon River. And it's said there about over 35,000 Venezuelan migrants in the country at present. Sometimes they just come. Well, the Warao are water people. They live. They build their houses, or they used to build their houses over water, and but they keep coming. But these are some of the unanticipated users of our rivers, and I don't want to say illegal migration, but certainly they are unanticipated migration. And sometimes there's been reckless operation. People go on the rivers and they feel they could just drink as much as they want, and they get drunk and they operate their motorboats in an unsafe manner. Sometimes people use jet skis. I don't know if there's a license for jet skis, but people have been involved in accidents, both from speeding and from reckless use of these jet skis. On one occasion, I actually saw a photograph of a youngster who was run over by one of these vehicles. It wasn't a pretty picture. So river transportation in Guyana doesn't have a nice record. In fact, there have been 27 accidents within the last 24 months between August 2020, when the new administration entered office, to August this year, 2022. There have been 27 accidents and 23 lives. Roughly speaking, one person has died on the river of Guyana every month. At least one person over the last 2 years. In the past, we've had worse cases. For example, in 1 year, in 2009, I think we had about 40 deaths in 1 year. And that was probably the deadliest year of river accidents in memory. And in one particular accident in 2008, on that same quarantine, probably backtracking, we had one accident in which 7 persons died. That's probably the single worst accident we've had on our rivers. But we could do better. We could do better to make river transportation safe for our citizens, particularly and our women, because women are very heavy users of these boats, particularly in backtracking and illegal migration. We therefore must look at how we can enforce our safety regulations. And what we call water taxis, river boats, motorboats, there are strict rules. And my friends, rules have been produced over a century and a quarter. This is nothing new. Laws have been on the books since 1890s. And particularly in the hinterland, river operations by motorboats are confined to daylight hours between 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Passengers are required to wear individual flotation kits, what you call life jackets. And there are lots of other safety measures. Legislation is, I would say, adequate. There's the Shipping Act, there's the Passenger Act, there's the River Navigation Act, and River Markers Act. So these are powerful instruments to ensure human safety. That's what it's all about. It's not about revenue collection. It's about prevention of protection of lives and prevention of accidents. That's what it's all about. Regulations, however, can't enforce themselves. It's good to have laws, it's good to have rules and regulations, but you need robust organization. You need rigorous implementation if you are going to save lives. But there is an adequate legislative framework. The Guyana Shipping Act, for example, provides for masters to be licensed to operate. Motorboats are required to be seaworthy or riverworthy, whatever you choose to call it. There are regulations to prevent collisions. There are regulations for liabilities. There are regulations for passenger safety. Then there's the Criminal Law Offences Act, which is the responsibility of the police and the courts. It provides for criminal acts which are committed in our jurisdiction to be punished. Penalties could be imposed for breaches of regulations. Operators could be fined. Their licenses could be suspended for the reckless endangerment of passengers' lives. Then there's the River Navigation Act. My friend, this was implemented in 1891. Nothing new. And it provides for certifying masters. You cannot simply pick up a boat and go on the water top. You have to, an operator has to be certified. Boats carrying passengers must have steersmen and bowmen. It's not a one-man show. There must be somebody in the bow. There must be steersmen. And the boats themselves must be licensed. They must be river-worthy. So all of these measures are meant to prevent accidents and to ensure that river navigation in Guyana is safe. So how do we move from here? We know that we've been losing at least one life per month. And in fact, there should be no loss of life on the Guyana's rivers. River navigation is not something for the bush. It's not a sideshow. Um, all of our hinterland residents, at some stage or other, need to use the rivers. Every police division has responsibility for rivers. Every hinterland region, particularly Region 1, Barima Waini, Region 7, Kuyuni Mazaruni, Region 8, the Pataro Separoni, and Region 9, the Rupununi. All these regions are named after rivers. And it therefore means that the regional administration, the RDCs, have responsibilities. So when we speak of riverine safety, we're speaking about responsibility that each RDC has to bear. Um, and to ensure the safety of our residents, whether they're from hinterland or coastland, we must ensure that that legislation, that administration, that the organization and the regulations and the implementation of those regulations are robust. So we're looking at river transportation safety. As I said, this is something that is being recognized since the pork knockers were going into the hinterland, and people were dying, and it was a real Wild West. Western Guyana for a time was real Wild West, but the regulations are there, and this is why the colonial government established the Transport and Harbors Department, and that is why some order was brought to our rivers. The launch and steamer services, and up to now we still rely. When you look at what happened recently, the Demerara Harbor Bridge, we still rely on the motorboats and we still rely on the launch and steamer services, although they're in private hands. And the Transport and Harbors Department, all of us grew up with TNHD. They built stellings, wharves, and dry docks, and they manage, our harbors. They train pilots to bring foreign vessels into our narrow waterways. And they train seamen. And of course, they created the regulatory framework, the rules and regulations which are needed to make sure that our river navigation is safe. But these cannot be left to chance. River transportation safety requires the coordinated action of at least 4 ministries in central government. The Ministry of Home Affairs, that is police, and fortunately, through the efforts of the coalition administration, the police have now created 4 hinterland divisions where there was only 1. So Region 1 has its own division, Region 7 has its own division, Region 8 has its own division, Region 9 has its own division. So the Ministry of Home Affairs, which has responsibility for the Guyana Police Force, has that overarching responsibility. The Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development, which of course has responsibility for all of the hinterland regions. The Ministry of Natural Resources, which is mostly concerned with logging and mining. And I would say too that they have responsibility for safety in the mining industry and safety in the use of rivers by the loggers and miners themselves. And the Ministry of Public Works, which has responsibility for riverine transport through the MARAD, the Maritime Administration Department. The police are supposed to have a riverine police unit. I don't know how strong that is. And the Ministry of Natural Resources during the coalition era used to have what is called a Corps of Wardens. Now, the Corps of Wardens was a corps of civilians who were trained by the police, who were armed, and they went into the mines, they went into the rivers, they went into the logging camps to save lives. But now you see, I don't know if the Corps of Wardens being disbanded, but you see the mining accidents continue because they're not being inspected by the Corps of Wardens, and the illegal or unsafe practices are not being prevented. And of course, the delinquents are not being punished. So that's why we need a Corps of Wardens, in addition to the police, in addition to the MARAD. You need these 4 ministries: Home Affairs, Local Government, Natural Resources, and Ministry of Public Works, to work together through their executive agencies to ensure human safety. That's what it's all about. It's about human safety. And they have to be given the capability and the capacity to patrol our rivers, just as we have highway patrol, just as we have traffic police on the coastline. You need river patrols in the hinterland. That's a fact of life, or else the rivers will remain unsafe. And these enforcement agencies, MARAD and the River Police and the Corps of Wardens, will ensure there's compliance with regulations by the motor boat operators in order to save passengers' lives. That's what it's all about. It's all about humanity. It's all about human lives. And I would like to propose, my friend, a few additional measures. To start with, don't just leave these 4 ministries, in abeyance. They need to have an executive authority, and I would call that executive authority the National River Transport Safety Authority. And this authority, it may be new, but it coordinates the functions of these 4 ministries in relation to river transportation safety. Secondly, there needs to be a safety search and rescue service. So in the event of emergencies, this authority could dispatch maybe vessels or other motorboats to rescue survivors and to ensure that those survivors are brought to hospital through some casualty evacuating mechanism. So we need that search and rescue service so that people don't, are not expected to be treading water, overnight, because some of these accidents, many of the accidents take place at night. And there are horror stories of people not only losing their lives, but of people being forced to hang on to a branch until help comes. But we need some search and rescue agency. And thirdly, there must be a formal motorboat operation training institute. Operators have to be certified. They have to go to school to learn to maintain those boats and operate safely. It may not be a long training course, but it is an essential training course. Motorboat operators must be educated about their legal obligations. They must know the law, and they must be educated to prevent accidents and to protect lives. And some of this, unfortunately, is not happening. My friends, river transportation, river safety is essential. We cannot leave these matters to chance. It may seem that these proposals, the National River Transport Safety Authority, the Search and Rescue Service, and the Motorboat Operators Training Institute, it may seem that they're pricey, but the benefit of efficient river transportation safety measures is priceless. Rivers will be here for a long time, but human lives are short. Let us do everything possible to save our lives on our rivers, this land of many rivers. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Each man